Some stories find you when you least expect them. This one came to me the way most good things do, quietly, in the telling. From folks who remember when the West was still being built by calloused hands and honest hearts. It's a simple tale. Really. A rancher. A woman nobody wanted. A barn door left unlocked on a cool autumn night. I've always believed that kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs someone willing to look past what the world sees and find what's actually there. This story is about that kind of seeing. It's about second chances. And how sometimes the people who wander onto your land are the very ones meant to stay. The barn door hung open 2 inches. Daniel Harper noticed it the way a man notices a wrong note in a familiar song. He set down the feed bucket, stood still, listened. Something moved in the hayloft. Not a raccoon too heavy, not a barn cat too deliberate. He crossed to the workbench, took the coal oil lamp, struck a match. The flame caught, throwing shadows against the weathered timber walls. The ladder groaned under his boots. 1 rung, 2, 3. He raised the lamp above his head. A woman lay curled in the hay. Big woman. Bonnet still tied under her chin. Shoes set beside her. Soles worn through to nothing. A small carpet bag clutched against her chest like a child holding a rag doll. Dried tear tracks cut pale lines through the dust on her cheeks. She didn't stir, didn't know he was there. Daniel crouched at the edge of the loft. Lamp held steady, and watched her breathe. If this story speaks to you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment below. Sometimes the best conversations start with a simple hello from a stranger. And as they say, a kind word never broke anyone's teeth. The rooster's crow cut through Clara Bennett's sleep like a slap. Her eyes snapped open. Hay, dust motes, slats of gray light through weathered boards. She sat up fast, too fast. Her head swam. Her back screamed from the hard planks beneath the straw. Then she remembered. The barn. The hayloft. A stranger's property. Her hands flew to her carpet bag. Still there. Still clasped shut. She checked the brass latch untouched. He hadn't searched her things. Clara's fingers trembled as she brushed hay from her hair. Her dress, the folds of her collar. Her bonnet had slipped sideways in the night. She straightened it, tied the ribbons tight under her chin. Below, something scraped against wood. A boot heel. A bucket handle. He was down there, waiting. She crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. Daniel Harper sat on a hay bale near the barn door, a tin cup in his hands. Steam rose from it, curling into the cold morning air. Another cup sat on a barrel beside him. He didn't look up. Clara's throat tightened. She knew what came next. The shouting. The threats. The sheriff. She'd seen it before, the way people's faces changed when they found her somewhere she didn't belong. She climbed down anyway. The ladder rungs bit into her sore feet. Her legs shook. When she reached the bottom, she turned to face him. He still didn't look at her body. Didn't let his eyes travel the way men's eyes always traveled. He just looked at her face. "Coffee's getting cold," he said. Clara didn't move. "I ain't a thief." Her voice came out rough, scraped raw from sleep and dust. "Didn't say you was—" He nodded toward the second cup. She stared at it. Steam still rising. He'd made it fresh. He'd known she was up there, and he'd made her coffee anyway. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Daniel Harper took a slow sip from his own cup, set it down on his knee. His face gave nothing away, no pity, no disgust, no charity giver's satisfaction. Figured you'd be hungry, he said. There's biscuits up at the house, old ones, but they'll do. Clara's stomach clenched. When had she last eaten 2 days 3? She reached for the cup. The tin was warm against her palms. And then she saw his eyes, really saw them, and the lines around them told a story she recognized. The hollowness of someone who'd eaten alone too many nights. The quiet of a house where no one answers back. This man wasn't offering charity. He was offering a chair at a table that had been empty too long. The pump handle groaned when Daniel worked it. Rust bled down the spout in orange streaks, but the water ran clear after 3 pumps. Soap's there. He nodded toward a dish on the wooden shelf beside the pump. Towels clean. Clara stood at the edge of the yard, carpetbag in hand, watching him. The morning sun caught the gray threading through his dark hair, the deep lines carved around his eyes. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. He turned and walked toward the barn without looking back. She waited until his boots disappeared around the corner. Then she set down her bag, untied her bonnet, and bent over the pump. The water hit her face like ice. She gasped, then pumped again. Again. Let it run over her hands, her neck, the back of her ears, where road dust had caked into the creases of her skin. The soap smelled like lye and tallow, harsh, honest. She scrubbed until her cheeks burned. The towel was rough cotton, frayed at the edges but clean. She pressed it to her face and breathed in. No mildew, no sour smell of neglect. Someone had washed this recently. Clara opened her carpetbag. One dress left, blue calico with patches on both elbows. The hem let out twice and still too short. She'd pressed it flat between her Bible and her spare stockings. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She changed behind the pump house, quick and quiet, her back to the open yard. The old dress she folded and tucked away. No use throwing out what might still be mended. The kitchen door stood open. She found Daniel inside, standing in front of a cold stove, arms crossed, staring at the iron top like it owed him money. A coffee pot sat on the counter, a tin of lard, a sack of flour from Miller's General, the paper torn at one corner. He didn't turn when she came in. "You want I should cook?" Clara asked. He stepped aside without a word. The stove was a kerosene model, old but solid. One burner ran hot, she could tell by the scorch marks on the grate. She adjusted the wick, struck a match, and watched the flame catch blue before settling orange. The cast iron skillet hung from a nail on the wall, seasoned black from years of use. She set it on the heat, spooned lard from the tin. The fat sizzled and popped, filling the kitchen with a smell that made her mouth water. Flour, salt, a bit of water from the pitcher on the counter. She worked the dough with her hands, not measuring, just feeling the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her. Biscuits didn't need recipes. They needed hands that remembered. She dropped 6 rounds into the hot skillet, covered them with a tin lid. Behind her, Daniel's stomach growled, loud. He shifted his weight but said nothing. Clara didn't turn around, just watched the edges of the biscuits turn gold. When they were done, she flipped them onto a chipped plate and set it on the table. Steam rose from the pile. The smell filled the room, lard and flour, and something warm that pushed back against the cold silence of the house. Daniel sat down, picked up a biscuit, bit into it. He didn't speak, just chewed, swallowed, reached for another. Clara leaned against the counter and watched him eat. 3 biscuits gone before he slowed down. His jaw worked steady, mechanical, like a man who'd forgotten food could taste like anything at all. "That rooster of yours got a death wish," she said. "Rats." Daniel looked up. "Near took my eye out this morning," Clara continued. "Came at me sideways when I was climbing down the ladder, wings flapping like he owned the place." The hard line of his mouth softened. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "He's been that way since spring," Daniel said. "Got into a fight with a hawk. Won, but it made him mean. Means one word for it." Clara folded her arms. "Fool's another." Daniel set down the last bite of biscuit, looked at her. Really looked not past her, not through her, but at her. "Stay through supper," he said. "Rest them feet. I'll point you toward town after." Clara's hands tightened on her elbows. Town. She knew what waited there. The same boarding house woman with the same pinched mouth, the same shop owners who wouldn't meet her eyes, the same whispered words behind gloved hands. "I ain't asking for charity," she said, "Didn't offer any." Daniel pushed back from the table. "Offered supper? And a chance to let them blisters heal before you walk another 10 miles on 'em." He crossed to the door, paused with one hand on the frame. "There's a room off the kitchen," he said. "Ain't much. Bed's narrow, but it's got a door that locks." Then he was gone. Boots thudding across the porch, heading toward the barn where the horses waited and the day's work wouldn't do itself. Clara stood alone in the kitchen. The stove ticked as it cooled. The smell of biscuits hung in the air. She looked around the room, saw the dust on the windowsill, the cobwebs in the corner above the stove, the curtains, faded and crooked, that hadn't been straightened in months, maybe years. This was a house that had stopped being tended, a house where someone had given up on the small things that made a place feel lived in. She walked to the window, through the wavy glass. She could see Daniel crossing the yard, his shoulders hunched, his gait slow and heavy, a man carrying something he wouldn't name. Clara turned back to the kitchen, looked at the dirty dishes stacked by the basin, the floor that needed sweeping, the stove that needed blacking. Her hands itched. One day he'd said, "Stay through supper." But as she reached for the broom leaning in the corner, Clara knew she'd already crossed a line she couldn't see. She'd stepped into someone else's grief, made herself useful in a house that had forgotten what useful felt like. And somewhere in her chest, in a place she'd learned to keep locked, a question was forming. What would it cost her to stay? Clara woke before the rooster. The small room off the kitchen was dark, the narrow bed hard beneath her back. She lay still for a moment, listening. Wind against the window. The creak of old timber settling. Nothing else. She rose, dressed in the dim gray of pre-dawn, and made her way to the kitchen. The flour sack sat where she'd left it. The lard tin. The salt cellar with its chipped rim. She worked quietly, mixing dough by feel, kneading it against the worn breadboard until it turned smooth and elastic under her palms. By the time boots thudded on the stairs, the dough was rising under a cloth and coffee was warming on the stove. Daniel stopped in the kitchen doorway. His hair was pressed flat on one side, his shirt buttoned wrong. He stared at the covered bowl, then at Clara, then at the steam curling from the coffee pot. "Biscuits'll be ready in an hour," she said. "Coffee's ready now." He poured himself a cup without speaking, drank it standing by the window, watching the sky lighten from black to purple to pale gold. Then he set down the cup and walked out the back door. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she tied on her apron and went to work. By the third morning, she'd found her rhythm. The henhouse was worse than she'd thought. Straw matted and sour. Droppings caked in the corners. 3 hens huddled on the same roost, feathers ruffled, eyes dull. The 4th, a red one with a torn comb, sat alone in the nesting box. Not moving. Clara gathered eggs first. 4. She set them in her apron pocket, careful not to crack the shells. Then she found a pitchfork, leaning against the wall, and began mucking out the old straw. The smell hit her in waves, ammonia and rot and the musty funk of neglect. She breathed through her mouth and kept working. Forkful after forkful, she piled the dirty straw outside the door. Fresh straw from the barn came next, spread thick and even across the floor. The red hen watched her with one suspicious eye. "You look about how I feel," Clara told her. "But you'll mend? We both will." She scattered feed from the bin by the door. The hen stirred, pecked, began to move with something like purpose. By mid-morning, Clara had swept the porch, scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, and found a broody hen in the barn who'd hidden a clutch of eggs behind a hay bale. She left those alone, no sense disturbing a mother's work. She was hauling water from the pump when she spotted the fence. It ran behind the barn, separating the main yard from the south pasture. 3 posts leaned at odd angles, the rails between them sagging or missing entirely. Chicken wire hung loose where something a coyote, maybe, or a determined dog had torn through. Clara set down the water buckets and walked over. The damage was old. Months. At least, maybe longer. The wood had weathered gray, the nail holes dark with rust. When Daniel rode back from checking the cattle, she was waiting by the barn door. "That fence," she said, pointing. "Leaning bad. You want help?" He dismounted slowly, looped the reins over the post, and looked where she pointed. His jaw tightened. "Been meaning to fix it," he said. "I can hold the posts while you nail." Clara offered. "Done it before." Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked to the barn for his tools. They worked through the afternoon. Clara braced each post while Daniel drove nails with a hammer that had seen better days. The handle was wrapped in leather strips where the original wood had cracked. He swung it steady, economical, never wasting a stroke. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. When the last rail was secure, Clara stepped back and wiped her forehead with her sleeve. Her shoulders ached. Her hands were raw where the rough wood had scraped them. But the fence stood straight. Daniel tested each post with his weight. Satisfied, he gathered his tools. "Supper?" Clara asked. He nodded. She made salt pork and beans, stretching the last of yesterday's biscuits with a fresh batch from the dough she'd set that morning. The kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of meat sizzling in the skillet. Daniel ate without speaking, his eyes fixed on his plate. 3 helpings of beans, 4 biscuits. He ate like a man who'd forgotten how good food could taste. When he finally pushed back from the table, Clara was washing dishes in the basin. "You cook better than I do," he said. She snorted, not turning around. "Lord, I hope so. Saw what you did to them eggs yesterday." Silence. She glanced over her shoulder. The hard line of Daniel's mouth had softened. Not a smile, not quite, but close. "Fair enough," he said. He rose, carried his plate to the basin, and set it beside the others. Then he walked to the back door and stood there, looking out at the yard. "Porch looks different," he said. Clara scrubbed a stubborn bit of grease from the skillet, swept it, found a broom in the corner. The chair. She paused, set down the skillet, turned. Daniel was still facing the yard, but his shoulders had gone rigid. "Found it in the barn," Clara said carefully. "Under a tarp. The joints were loose and the finish was dull, but the bones were good. Oiled it up, tightened the screws. Seemed ashamed to let it rot." He didn't respond. Clara dried her hands on her apron, waited. "That was my mother's chair," Daniel said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything. "Sarah used to sit in it evenings. After she passed, I couldn't." He stopped, swallowed. "I put it away." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I can put it back." "No." The word came out rough. He turned, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Something raw and unguarded. "Leave it. It's—" He stopped again, jaw working. "It's good to see it there." He walked out onto the porch. The screen door banged shut behind him. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, dishwater cooling around her wrists. Through the window, she watched Daniel lower himself into the rocking chair. He sat there, still as stone, staring at the mountains going pink with sunset. The chair creaked once as he shifted his weight. Clara watched him rock, slow and steady, and wondered how long it had been since he'd let himself cry. A week had passed since Clara first slept in the hayloft. Rain came down in sheets that morning. It started just after breakfast, a few drops tapping the kitchen window, then a steady drum on the tin roof that grew louder until conversation required raised voices. By mid-morning, the yard had turned to mud, and the rain barrel beside the porch overflowed, sending a stream of water down toward the barn. Clara stood at the window, watching the water run. No point going out in this. The henhouse would hold. The horses were dry in the barn. The fence they'd fixed would stand, or it wouldn't. Nothing to be done about it now. Behind her, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, mending a bridle. His hands moved slow and steady, threading leather through brass buckles, testing each connection with a firm tug. The kerosene lamp on the table hissed softly, its glass chimney throwing warm light across his weathered face. Clara had been avoiding the photograph on the mantel since her first morning in the house. It sat in a brass frame, tarnished green at the edges, propped between a tin clock and a Bible with a cracked spine. A woman's face looked out from the daguerreotype young, with dark hair parted in the middle, and eyes that seemed to hold some private joke. Today, with rain sealing them inside, and nothing left to clean, Clara couldn't look away. "That your wife?" she asked. Daniel's hand stopped moving. He didn't look up. "Sarah?" he said. 5 years married. Fever took her. 3 years gone now. Clara crossed to the mantel, lifted the frame. The brass was cold against her fingers. She studied the face, the curve of the woman's mouth, the way she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something just out of frame. "She was beautiful," Clara said. Daniel set down the bridle, rose from his chair, walked over and took the photograph from her hands, gentle, like he was handling something that might break. "She was kind," he said. "That's what I remember most." He set the frame back on the mantel, adjusted it so the face looked out at the room. Clara watched him, the way his fingers lingered on the brass, the way his jaw tightened when he stepped back. "Kind's worth more than beautiful," she said. "Lasts longer, too." Daniel turned, looked at her. really looked the way he'd looked at her that first morning in the barn, like he was trying to see past what was in front of him to something underneath. "Sit down," he said. "Coffee's still warm." They sat across from each other at the table. Rain hammered the roof. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Daniel poured coffee into 2 tin cups and pushed one toward her. "How'd you end up in my hayloft?" he asked. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup. The heat seeped into her palms. "Lost my position," she said. "I was cooking for a family in town. Good family. Paid fair. Didn't work me too hard. Then the old man died and his son took over." She paused, took a sip of coffee. It was stronger than she liked, but she didn't complain. "New owner said I put folks off their feed. Said his guests couldn't enjoy their supper with me standing in the kitchen doorway." Clara's voice stayed flat, matter of fact. "Gave me a week's wages and showed me the door." Daniel said nothing, just listened. "Boarding house took me in for a while. I cleaned rooms, washed sheets, helped in the kitchen when they'd let me. Thought I could make enough to get somewhere else. Start fresh." Clara set down her cup. "Then the owner's wife decided I was taking up too much space. Said I was scaring off the other boarders. Threw my bags into the street one morning. Called me names I won't repeat." The rain kept falling. Water dripped somewhere, a leak in the roof Clara hadn't noticed before. "So I walked," she said. She didn't know where, just away. Figured I'd find work somewhere. A farm, maybe. Somebody who needed hands and didn't care what those hands looked like. She met his eyes. "I walked for 3 days, slept in ditches. Ate what I could find, then I saw your barn. Door was open. Hay looked soft." She shrugged. "Figured I'd rest an hour, then move on before anybody noticed." "But I noticed," Daniel said. "You did." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full of things neither of them knew how to say. Daniel stood, walked to the bureau in the corner, the one Clara had dusted but never opened. He pulled out the top drawer, reached inside, and came back with something small in his hand. A handkerchief. White cotton, yellowed at the edges. Pink roses embroidered in one corner. The stitches careful and even. "Sarah made this," he said. "Back when we were courting. She wasn't much for fancy work. But she wanted to make something nice." He held it out to Clara. "She'd want someone to use it." Clara stared at the handkerchief, at the faded roses, at the years of love stitched into every thread. "I can't take that," she said. "Ain't asking you to take it." Daniel set it on the table between them. "Just asking you to use it. Keep it, or give it back someday. Don't matter. But it shouldn't sit in a drawer going yellow while there's somebody here who might need it." Clara's throat ached. She picked up the handkerchief, ran her thumb over the embroidered roses. The thread was soft from age, but the stitches still held. "Thank you," she said. The words came out rough. Daniel sat back down, picked up his bridle, started working the leather again like nothing had happened, but something had. Clara folded the handkerchief and tucked it into her apron pocket. The weight of it was almost nothing. A scrap of cloth, a dead woman's needlework. But it meant he saw her as someone worth giving things to, someone who might stay long enough to use them. The rain began to ease. Drops still tapped the roof, but softer now, less urgent. Light shifted through the window as clouds thinned somewhere overhead. "Storm's passing," Daniel said without looking up. Clara nodded. But she wasn't thinking about the storm. She was thinking about the way he'd said Sarah's name, The way his voice had cracked, just slightly, on the word kind. The way he'd given away a piece of his wife to a stranger he'd known less than 2 weeks. This man had lost everything that mattered to him. And somehow, without meaning to, Clara had started to matter. She looked at Daniel, bent over his work, lamplight catching the gray in his hair. And she wondered, not for the first time, but sharper now, what would happen when the outside world found its way back to this quiet ranch, because the world always came back. And when it did, it never came alone. The wagon came on Sunday. Clara heard it before she saw it, wheels crunching over gravel, the creak of springs, the snort of a horse being pulled to a stop. She was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, flour dusting her apron and the backs of her hands. She went still, listened. Voices. A woman's voice, high and sharp. Another voice, younger, murmuring agreement. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. A buckboard sat in the yard. 2 women climbed down from the seat, one older, one young. The older woman wore a Sunday bonnet with silk ribbons pressed flat and stiff. A dark dress buttoned to her throat despite the autumn warmth. Her face was narrow, her chin pointed, her eyes already scanning the property like she was taking inventory. The younger one, daughter, by the look of her, hung back, clutching a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw the visitors. His shoulders stiffened. "Mrs. Pruitt?" he said. "Miss Pruitt?" The older woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel Harper. We were just on our way back from services and thought we'd check in on you. Make sure you haven't wasted away out here all by yourself." She glanced at the house, at the clean porch, at the rocking chair sitting in the sun. "Though it seems you've been keeping busy." "Doing all right," Daniel said. Mrs. Pruitt's gaze moved past him to the kitchen window. Clara stepped back. Too late. "Why, Daniel," Mrs. Pruitt's voice sharpened. "You have company." Daniel didn't turn around. "She's helping out." "Helping out?" Mrs. Pruitt repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "I didn't know you'd taken on help?" The pause before help hung in the air like smoke. Clara's hands tightened on her apron. She knew that pause. She'd heard it 100 times before in boarding houses and kitchens, in doorways and town squares. It was the pause people used when they wanted to say something ugly, but didn't want to be blamed for saying it. "Well?" Mrs. Pruitt smoothed her skirts. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Daniel stood motionless for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the house. Clara met him at the door. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her face still. "This is Mrs. Pruitt," Daniel said. "And her daughter, Miss Pruitt. They're neighbors. Ranch about 4 miles east." "Pleased to meet you," Clara said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Mrs. Pruitt's eyes traveled up Clara's body, slow and deliberate, the flour-dusted apron, the patched dress, the broad shoulders and thick waist. The assessment was clinical, thorough. The kind of look a butcher gives a side of beef before deciding which cuts are worth keeping. "And you are?" Mrs. Pruitt asked. "Clara Bennett." "Miss Bennett?" Another pause. "And where are you from?" "Miss Bennett." "Missouri. Originally. Been working around the territory these past few years?" "Working?" Mrs. Pruitt's eyebrows rose. "As what exactly?" A cook. Before that, laundress. Whatever needs doing. I see. Mrs. Pruitt turned to Daniel. And how long will Miss Bennet be? Helping out. Daniel's jaw tightened. Long as she wants. Silence fell. The younger Miss Pruitt shifted her weight, the basket creaking in her grip. A fly buzzed somewhere near the porch rail. Mrs. Pruitt smiled again, that thin, tight smile that showed too many teeth. How very Christian of you, Daniel, taking in a stranger like this. Your mother would be proud. She glanced back at Clara. Though I do hope Miss Bennet understands the delicacy of the situation. A single woman, living under the same roof as a widower. People will talk. Let them, Daniel said. Mrs. Pruitt's smile flickered, just for a moment. Then it was back, smooth as glass. Of course. Well, she adjusted her bonnet. We won't keep you. I'm sure you have work to do. Miss Bennet? She nodded. Once, in Clara's direction, the kind of nod you give a servant, not a person. Do take care. She turned and walked back to the wagon, her daughter trailing behind. The younger woman glanced back once, her face flushed, her eyes apologetic. Then she climbed up beside her mother and took the reins. The wagon rolled out of the yard. Gravel crunched, wheels creaked. The sound faded until there was nothing left but wind and the distant call of a meadowlark. Clara stood on the porch, watching the dust settle. Daniel came up beside her. He didn't speak. I should go, Clara said. He turned. What? Before I cause you trouble. She kept her eyes on the road. You heard her. People will talk. They're probably already talking. By tomorrow, every ranch in 20 miles will know you've got a... She stopped, swallowed. A woman like me under your roof. A woman like you, Daniel repeated. Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. You know what I mean. I know what Pruitt means. That ain't the same thing. Daniel, you think I care what she says? His voice was low, rough. Woman hasn't had a kind word for anybody since the Lincoln administration. She'd find fault with the angels themselves if they landed in her yard. Clara turned to face him. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. It ain't just her, Clara said. It's everyone, the whole town. You go to buy feed next week. They'll be looking at you different, whispering behind the counter, making jokes when you walk out the door. Let them... Easy for you to say. You've got land, a name. People respect you. And you think that matters. Daniel stepped closer. You think I built this place so folks in town would nod at me when I ride in? I don't give a damn what they think. Never have. Clara searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the crack in his certainty. She didn't find one. You're a fool, she said quietly. Probably. Daniel shrugged. But I'm a fool with decent biscuits for the first time in 3 years. And a clean kitchen. And a hen house that don't smell like something died in it. He met her eyes. You ain't caused me trouble. Clara, you ain't caused me nothing but good. Clara's throat tightened. She looked away. The road stretched empty toward the horizon. The Pruitt wagon was long gone, but she could still feel the weight of Mrs. Pruitt's gaze, the way those eyes had measured her and found her wanting. This wasn't over. She knew that. The Pruitts would talk. Others would listen. Questions would be asked in feed stores and church pews. Speculation would spread like fire through dry grass. And sooner or later, Daniel would have to choose between his reputation and the woman who'd stumbled into his barn. "Come inside," Daniel said. "Bread's gonna overproof." Clara nodded, followed him through the door. But as she went back to her dough, as she punched it down and shaped it for the pan, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The quiet bubble they'd built around themselves, the simple rhythm of work and meals and evening silence had been punctured. The outside world had found them. And the outside world never came just once. Daniel came back from town different. Clara saw it the moment he rode into the yard. His shoulders sat wrong, hunched forward, tight. His jaw worked side to side like he was chewing on something bitter. He dismounted without looking at her, led the bay mare into the barn, and stayed there longer than any horse needed tending. She stood at the kitchen window, watching, waiting. When he finally came inside, he didn't speak, just washed his hands at the basin, dried them on the towel, and sat down at the table. Clara set his plate in front of him. Salt pork, beans, biscuits. He ate with his eyes fixed on the food, fork scraping against tin, jaw working steady. Not a word. She sat across from him, her own plate, untouched. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and heavy. She knew. She'd heard enough whispers in her life to recognize the shape of them on a man's face, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers, the way his hands gripped the fork too tight, knuckles going white, the way he chewed like every bite cost him something. Small town, word traveled fast. "You ain't eating?" Daniel said. First words he'd spoken since coming home. "Not hungry?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw it, the thing he was carrying, the weight he wouldn't name. It sat behind his eyes like a stone dropped in still water. "Town was busy," he said, flat. "Careful?" "I reckon it was." He went back to eating. Clara went back to watching him. The silence stretched. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. When supper was done, Daniel carried his plate to the basin and walked out onto the porch without a word. Clara heard the creak of the rocking chair, then nothing. She washed the dishes alone. That night, she lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Moonlight slanted through the lace curtain, throwing patterns on the wall. The house settled around her timber, groaning, floorboards shifting. She thought about the way Mrs. Pruitt had looked at her, the slow crawl of those eyes up and down, measuring and finding her wanting, the pause before the word help, the smile that wasn't a smile at all. She thought about the words Daniel wouldn't say, the whispers he'd heard in town, the questions people must have asked him, the jokes they must have made when his back was turned. Harper and his fat charity case. Probably can't get rid of her. Poor man. Saddled with that. Clara's face burned in the darkness. Heat crept up her neck, her cheeks, her ears. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. She was making him small, making him a joke. Every day she stayed. She took something from him, his reputation, his standing, his right to walk through town without people snickering behind their hands. She'd done this before. Made herself small in corners, invisible in doorways, trying not to take up space. But she'd never made someone else pay for her presence? Not until now. The shame of it sat on her chest like a stone. She couldn't breathe around it, couldn't swallow past it. She had to go. Clara rose from the bed. The floorboards were cold under her bare feet. She moved quietly, carefully, the way she'd learned to move in all the houses where she'd been unwelcome. Her carpet bag sat in the corner. She opened it, began to pack. One dress, the blue calico with the patched elbows. Her Bible, leather cover worn soft from years of handling. The handkerchief Daniel had given her, roses embroidered in pink thread. Sarah's careful stitches still holding after all these years. She folded the handkerchief and tucked it inside the Bible, pressed the book against her chest for a moment, then placed it in the bag and closed the brass clasp. The kitchen was silver with moonlight. Clara found the pen and ink bottle on the shelf above the stove, the same ones Daniel used for his accounts. She tore a corner from the brown paper that had wrapped the flour sack. The pen scratched against the paper. Her hand shook. "Thank you for seeing me when most folks don't. Clara." She read it twice, 3 times, then set it on the table and weighted it down with the salt cellar white ceramic, chipped at the rim, the same one she'd used to season every meal she'd cooked in this kitchen. She stood there, looking around, the stove she'd blacked just yesterday, the floor she'd scrubbed on her hands and knees, the curtains she'd straightened, the cobwebs she'd swept away, the windowsills she'd dusted, the chair where Daniel sat every morning, coffee cup in hand, watching the sun come up over the mountains. Clara walked to it, rested her fingers on the back. The wood was smooth under her palm, worn by years of use. She thought about the way he looked at her. Not past her. Not through her. At her. Like she was someone worth looking at. She thought about his voice when he'd said, "Stay," the way his face had softened when she made him laugh about the rooster, the way he'd given her Sarah's handkerchief like it was nothing, like she was someone worth giving things to. Her throat ached. She picked up her carpet bag, walked to the front door, lifted the latch. Cool night air hit her face. Stars scattered across the sky, thick as spilled salt. The gravel path gleamed pale in the moonlight, leading away from the porch, away from the house, away from everything she'd let herself want. Clara stepped outside, pulled the door closed behind her. The click of the latch was the loudest sound she'd ever heard. She walked, one foot in front of the other. The gravel crunched under her boots, the boots with the worn-through soles, the boots that had carried her here from a boarding house, where a woman with a pinched mouth had thrown her belongings into the street. She didn't look back. The road stretched ahead, pale and empty. The mountains rose black against the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called one long, wavering note that hung in the air and then faded to nothing. Clara kept walking. Her feet ached. The blisters she'd thought were healing cracked open again, raw and stinging. The carpet bag grew heavier with every step. The cold crept through her thin shawl and settled into her bones. But she didn't stop. Behind her, the ranch grew smaller. The windows dark, the porch empty, the rocking chair still. She thought about Daniel, asleep in his room, not knowing she was gone, not knowing the house would be cold in the morning. The stove unlit, the coffee pot empty. She thought about the note on the table, the salt cellar holding it down, the words she'd written, already drying in the dark. "Thank you for seeing me." She walked faster. The road curved around a stand of cottonwoods, their branches black against the stars. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust. By morning, she would be gone. And Daniel Harper would wake to find that the only person who'd made his house feel like a home had vanished in the night, leaving nothing behind but a scrap of paper and an empty chair. Daniel woke to silence. Not the ordinary quiet of early morning, the kind broken by bird calls and wind and the distant lowing of cattle. This silence pressed against his ears, heavy, wrong. He lay still, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different, emptier, like something essential had been removed while he slept. He rose, pulled on his boots, walked down the stairs. The kitchen was cold. The stove sat unlit, the coffee pot empty. No smell of biscuits. No sound of movement from the small room off the hall. Daniel stood in the doorway, his chest tightening. Then he saw the note. It sat on the table, weighted down by the salt cellar. A torn scrap of brown paper. Words scratched in ink that had smeared at the edges. "Thank you for seeing me when most folks don't. Clara." He read it once, twice. The words blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. His legs gave out. He sat down hard on her chair, the one she'd pulled up to the table that first morning, the one she'd sat in every meal since. The note crumpled in his fist. He sat there in the gray pre-dawn light, listening to the silence of a house that had been alive for 2 weeks and was now dead again. The coffee pot, cold. The stove, unlit. The small room off the kitchen, empty. Daniel smoothed the note flat on the table, stared at the words. His throat worked, but nothing came out. "Thank you for seeing me." He had seen her. He'd seen the way she moved through his house like she was trying not to take up space, the way she worked twice as hard as any hired hand, never stopping, never complaining, the way she laughed at his rooster and made his biscuits taste like something his mother might have baked. He'd seen her, and he'd said nothing that mattered. Daniel stood. The chair scraped against the floor. He didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. The barn door banged open. The bay mare startled in her stall, ears flattening. He saddled her fast, fingers working the straps from muscle memory. Bridle. Reins. Cinch pulled tight. He led her out into the yard and swung up. The eastern sky was turning purple at the edges. Stars still scattered overhead, fading one by one. The road stretched ahead, pale in the growing light. Daniel kicked the mare into a canter. He found her a mile down, where the road curved around a stand of cottonwoods. Walking slow, carpetbag in hand, shoulders hunched against the morning chill. The sound of hoofbeats made her stiffen. But she didn't turn. Didn't stop. Just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, like if she pretended hard enough he wouldn't be there. Daniel pulled up beside her. The mare snorted, tossing her head. "Clara?" She didn't answer. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Clara, stop." She kept walking. Daniel dismounted, looped the reins over his arm, fell into step beside her. "Where you planning to go Nothing. Her boots crunched on the gravel. Her breath came in short, sharp puffs. I asked you a question. Don't matter where. Her voice was rough, scraped raw. Just away. Away where town, the same folks who threw you out once. She flinched, kept walking. You got money for a room, a ticket on the stage. You got anywhere at all that's waiting for you. I got my 2 feet. Her chin lifted. They carried me this far. They'll carry me further. Daniel stopped. Let her take 3 more steps. 4. 5. And what about me? She stopped. What about when I come back to that house tonight and there's no supper on the stove, no coffee in the morning, no one to tell me my rooster's a fool? Clara turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale in the gray light. You'll manage, she said. You managed before. I survived before. Daniel's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. That ain't the same thing. She stared at him. Her carpet bag hung at her side, the brass clasp catching the first light of dawn. You heard what they're saying in town, she said. You heard the whispers, the jokes. You think I don't know what that's costing you? You think I care what Pruitt says? Daniel stepped toward her. You think I'd trade coffee that don't taste like burned leather for the approval of a woman who ain't smiled since her wedding day? Clara's mouth twitched. She looked away. It ain't just Pruitt. It's everyone. The whole town. Then let 'em talk. Daniel reached for her carpet bag. His fingers closed around the handle. They've been talking about me for 3 years anyway. Crazy Harper, out on that ranch all alone. Couldn't even keep a wife alive. You think a few more whispers is going to break me? She didn't let go of the bag. Her knuckles went white around the strap. I ain't your burden to carry, Daniel Harper. You ain't a burden. He tugged the bag gently. She held on. You're the only damn thing worth coming home to. Her grip loosened. The bag slid free. Daniel set it on the ground between them, straightened, looked her in the eye. I ain't asking for nothing, he said. Not a thing you don't want to give. Just... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, started again. Just quit walking, please. Clara stood still. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. They'll say I trapped you, she said. That I took advantage of a lonely man. Let 'em. They'll say you lost your mind, that you're a fool. Been called worse. Daniel, I don't care what they say. His voice was quiet now, steady. I care that when I woke up this morning, my house was empty. I care that you were walking away in the dark. Clara's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together. What if they're right? She whispered. What if I ain't worth the trouble? Daniel picked up the carpet bag, slung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Reckon that's my choice to make, he said. Not theirs. He turned and walked back toward the mare, tied the carpet bag behind the saddle, took the reins in his hand. Then he looked back at Clara, still standing in the middle of the road, the dawn light turning her face gold. You coming? He asked. Clara took one step, then another. Daniel waited, holding the mare's reins, watching her cross the distance between them. Her boots scuffed against the gravel. Her breath came shallow, visible in the cool morning air. She stopped beside the horse, looked at the carpet bag tied behind the saddle, looked at Daniel. I ain't good at this, she said. At what? Staying. Daniel reached up and adjusted the saddle strap. His hands moved slow, deliberate. Reckon you'll learn? He helped her mount. His hand was rough and warm against hers, calloused from years of fence posts and hay bales and reins. She settled into the saddle, the leather creaking under her weight. Daniel took the mare's bridle and began to walk. They moved in silence. The road unwound behind them, the cottonwoods shrinking to dark shapes against the brightening sky. Birds called from the brush meadowlarks, their songs high and thin in the morning stillness. Clara watched the back of Daniel's head, the gray threading through his dark hair, the set of his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his boots against the packed earth. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. He knew she was there. The ranch appeared around the final bend, the barn with its weathered timber walls, the house with its swept porch, the pasture where the cattle moved like slow brown shadows against the grass. No smoke curled from the chimney. The stove had gone cold while they were gone. "Left the stove out," Daniel said. "You'll burn the house down one of these days." "Probably." He kept walking. "Good thing you'll be there to stop me." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't answer. They reached the yard. Daniel tied the mare to the porch rail and lifted down the carpet bag. He set it on the steps, then stood there, looking up at her. "You getting down? Or you planning to sleep in that saddle?" Clara dismounted. Her legs were stiff, her feet sore inside her worn boots. She stood on the packed earth of the yard and looked at the house she'd swept and scrubbed and cooked in, the house she'd walked away from in the dark. It looked the same faded curtains in the windows, the same rocking chair on the porch, the same scorch marks on the chimney from a fire someone had let burn too hot. But something had changed, something she couldn't name. "I ain't asking for nothing," Daniel said. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything but the words. "Not a thing you don't want to give. Just stay. Rest of it." He stopped for Obese, rubbed the back of his neck. "Rest of it we figure out." Clara looked at him, really looked, at the lines around his eyes, the gray in his stubble, the way his hands hung at his sides, uncertain. "What will folks say?" she asked. "Reckon they'll say plenty." He met her eyes. "Ain't none of it my concern." "Daniel, 3 years I been out here alone." His jaw tightened. 3 years eating food that tasted like nothing, talking to nobody but the horses, watching the sun come up and wondering why I bothered. He took a breath, let it out slow. "Done with that. Done letting other people decide how I live." Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard, looked away. "Come inside," Daniel said. "I'll make coffee." She followed him up the porch steps, through the door, into the kitchen. The stove was cold, the iron top dusty with ash. Daniel found the coffee pot, filled it with water, measured grounds into the basket. He lit the burner, set the pot on the heat, stood back. Clara watched him. His hands moved with the same careful economy she'd seen when he worked the fence posts, the same deliberate precision. But something was different now. Something lighter. The coffee began to boil. The smell filled the kitchen, bitter and rich and familiar. Daniel poured 2 cups, handed one to Clara. She took a sip. Her face twisted. "Lord have mercy." She set the cup down. "You burned it black." Daniel looked into his own cup, frowned. "Tastes fine to me." "That's because you ain't got taste buds left." Clara took the pot from the stove, dumped the contents into the basin, and started fresh. "Sit down. I'll make it right." He sat. Watched her move through the kitchen, measuring grounds, adjusting the flame, testing the water temperature with her finger. Her hands moved without hesitation, sure and quick. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and sat down across from him. They drank in silence. The clock ticked on the mantel. Outside, the rooster crowed, late and indignant. "I ain't easy to live with," Clara said finally. Daniel set down his cup. "Neither am I. I snore. I talk in my sleep. I take up space. House has plenty of space." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Been too empty for too long." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm tin. The heat seeped into her palms, her fingers, her wrists. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel stood, walked to the back door, looked out at the yard, the barn, the mountains rising blue and gold in the morning light. "Now," he said, "I got a fence needs checking on the south ridge, and them hens need feeding. And that rooster," he glanced back at her, "that rooster needs someone to keep him humble." Clara snorted. "He ain't got a humble bone in his body." "Neither do I." Daniel opened the door, paused. "You coming?" She rose, left her cup on the table, followed him out onto the porch. The second rocking chair sat beside the first dusty, one arm loose, pulled from the barn where Daniel had stored it. He must have dragged it out before he went to find her. Clara stopped, stared at it. "Figured you'd want somewhere to sit," Daniel said. "Why, evenings get long out here." She walked to the chair, ran her fingers over the arm. The wood was rough, neglected, but solid underneath. She sat down. The chair creaked, then settled. Daniel sat in the other chair, the one his mother had rocked in, the one Sarah had loved. They looked out at the yard, the barn, the mountains catching fire with morning light. Neither spoke. The coffee cooled in their cups. The wind stirred the grass. Somewhere in the pasture, a cow called to her calf. And Clara Bennett, the woman nobody wanted, the woman who'd slept in a stranger's hayloft because she had nowhere else to go, sat on a porch in Colorado territory and watched the sun climb over the mountains. Beside her, Daniel Harper rocked slowly, his eyes on the horizon. 2 chairs, 2 cups, 2 people who had stopped running. There is something quiet that stays after a story like this one, something that settles in the chest and asks for nothing, no answers, no conclusions, just a moment to breathe. Many of us know what it is to be looked past, to walk into a room and feel invisible, to carry kindness inside us that no one thought to ask for. Perhaps you have stood in a doorway, unsure if you belonged. Perhaps you have loved someone who never knew the shape of what you carried for them. These things do not need to be explained. They do not need to be fixed or understood or wrapped in meaning. They are simply ours, heavy sometimes, tender always, and more common than any of us like to admit. If something in this story felt familiar, it is all right to let it rest there. You do not owe it resolution. You do not owe anyone an explanation for what moved through you while you listened. Some feelings are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be held, gently, and then set down when we are ready. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.